Okay, now I'm gonna start sharing my screen. I wanted to make sure we had that recording in progress so that we can make sure that other folks are able to view this later. Thank you all for joining tonight's Building Floodwise Communities workshop. Today we're gonna focus on Flooding 101. We're gonna have a couple of housekeeping um, for today. So I'm going to share this link in the chat for you all to sign in. It is imperative that you sign in with this form so that we know that you have attended. If you have any issues accessing that, please use the chat. Your participation for this webinar will be mainly through the chat. So when I ask if anybody has any questions, if anybody would like to speak or anything like that, just try to raise your hand and I'll try to promote you if you would like to speak out loud. But please feel free to, and I see you all are raising your hands. And I'm going to get, okay, Sharice, you should be able to talk.
Many thanks. How are you, Jimani?
Good.
I just wanted to let you know that the chat box is disabled and we're
Okay.
not able to place anything into the chat. I was able to put a Q&A, my statement of the chat box being disabled in the Q&A, but I'm not sure if you saw that.
I do see it now.
Wonderful.
And okay, now can you all access the chat?
I still see it as disabled. That's just me. I don't know, whatever.
Can
Yes, it's
everybody?
still disabled.
Disable for me too.
I got access to the chat.
Okay.
Yep, I have access to the chat. I see it.
You have access?
Yeah, I see the link.
Now we've engaged.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much.
It's
Thank you so
working.
much.
It's
Okay,
working.
great, great, great. Thank you so much. This is our first virtual workshop, so please bear with me for any of the technical difficulties. I'll also put a disclaimer. I've been having technical difficulties with my computer, so if any moment we're stopping or anything like that, or you cannot hear me, just let me know. You should be able to access the chat now. And you can also enter those questions like you indicated, Sharice, in the chat. Okay, so I think that's good. I'm gonna try to get started now. Okay. Just welcome and introductions. If you haven't met me before, I am Jimani Overby and I serve as the DC Conservation Advocate with Nature Forward. We are so happy to be leading this effort with Building Floodwise Communities, this grant program with our partners who are indicated on the first slide. And our partners include the Ward 7 Resilience Hub Community Coalition, the Green Scheme, Washington Interfaith and Network, as well as the Department of Energy and Environment. So some of you might have attended our in-person workshops in Ward 7. We had them in earlier this spring and into this summer at the Fauntroy Center and the Chavez Charter School, and both in Ward 7. And now we are continuing this effort online, and we will also be providing workshops in Ward 8 at the ARC through the Community Leadership and Enrichment Workshops, as well as through our programming with the Green Scheme through Ward 8 Water Watchers field trips. So for any information on how you can continue to engage in this topic, how youth can engage in this topic, please feel free to contact myself and I can connect you to any of our partners for any interest you may have. Okay. And I'm not sure, I do see some of our partners are on today, including Jaren and Sharice. If you all would like to introduce yourself, feel free. If not, if you're not in the space to do so, that's all right. I just wanted to welcome you and open the space for you all to do that.
Well, thank you, Jimani, for being an awesome host as always. I am Jaren Hill Lockridge, a Ward 8 resident working with the Green Scheme, and super excited to be here and sharing space and learning so much. We've been doing these series of workshops so that we can deepen our understanding of flooding in our community, and excited to share that info with you all today.
Thank you. Anything from you, Sharice?
I was going
Okay,
to
I'll
conserve
see
on
it.
time. So I just wanted to quickly say thank you so much again, Jimani. It has been a wonderful and a pleasure to partner with you and Nature Forward. We want to thank everyone who may be on the line that attended one of our FloodWise workshops, be it in person at the Fauntleroy Center, one of our partners, as well as the Cesar Chavez Public Charter School as well. So we want to thank everyone that's here. This is some great information, and Jimani will give some excellent insight out to flood-proof your home, your property, and to save you some unwanted grief, since many of us in Ward 7 reside in a floodplain. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharice. And so just some housekeeping before we get to the meat of why we're here, into Flooding 101. I'm going to resend, I've sent it a few times, so I'm going to resend it. Please make sure that you fill out that form. That is like our sign-in sheet for today. It includes some information about why you're here today, how you found out about it. You can include any questions you have, and we'll be able to contact and continue to stay in communication with you throughout the course of this series, and be able to follow up with you at the end of the virtual series in September to make sure you receive your stipend for completing this workshop series. And I'll get a little bit into our introductions. I'll start with this first because it might take a while for you to type it if you don't want to say it out loud. But please share your story in the chat. Share your name, where you live. Do you have a story about flooding? Have you experienced flooding before? And what do you want to get out of this session? And while you all start to type that, I will go back and kind of go over some of these slides, including our agenda for today. So today we're going to get into the flooding basics. Where does it flood? And finding out where our FEMA flood maps are. And we're going to try and do a little flood map exercise together. If you are on a laptop or on a tablet, it'll be easier for you to do the flood map exercise. That does not mean you're not able to do it on your phone. It'll just be a little bit easier looking at a map on a larger screen. Okay. And the goals for today's workshop include learning the basics of flooding, including the types of flooding and what a floodplain is, learn where and how flooding affects your community, and learn how to understand your flood risk through the FEMA flood maps. And at any point I'm going too fast or you have any questions, I want you all to please make sure that you let me know in the chat. I'd be happy to slow down, go back to something, explain something, refer to our partners. If the way that I'm saying it isn't clicking, I'd be happy to refer to any of our partners to chime in. Okay, some ground rules. Everybody is encouraged to participate. Of course, like I said, a lot of the participation can be through the chat, but I have made it possible for all of you to unmute yourself throughout the course of this webinar to speak. So when you do speak, please state your name and where you live, and be sure to just respect and listen to everybody's points of view while we're here. We want to be able to share space, even in a virtual setting, making sure we feel the community and the understanding surrounding some of these issues, and understanding that a lot of the issues with flooding deal with your personal belongings, they deal with your home, and they deal with all of these things that are so important to us. So we want to make sure that we are being cognizant of how we're speaking of these things. Okay. So I did ask for you to share your story in the chat while I gave that little bit of overview, but would anybody like to come off mute and share where they live, if they have a story about flooding, or if you don't have a story about flooding, what do you want to get out of this session? Let us know, what do you need from us? And again, everybody should be allowed to talk.
Hello, my name is Samson. I'm from Ward 7. I don't really have a flood story, but I would like to learn more about flooding in DC overall and what can we do to prevent it.
Thank you. Thank you, Samson, for joining us. Anybody else?
I would chime in. Sharice Muhammad, Ward 7, Deanwood resident, also member of the Ward 7 Resilience Hub Community Coalition. I always learn something new. Even though we presented this information, I always learn something new from participants who come to these workshops and webinars. So I always like to listen and learn from other neighbors and fellow residents of the District of Columbia, because flood impacts are kind of day-to-day concerns, because we don't necessarily have to wait on a hurricane or a storm. Some of us live within close proximity of the Watts Branch and the Anacostia River. And so there's always impacts with regards to cresting and high tides in those water bodies, and they do impact our community. We may not necessarily pay attention or keep up with the details, but the impacts are always there. So I'm curious to hear other neighbors in the community, your impact and how you watch weather and advisories. So all of that has bearing when we talk about flooding.
Thank you so much, Sharice. And I also learned a lot. I was not an expert on this topic, and by no means am I 100% an expert as like some of the experts that joined us in our flood insurance workshop, but happy to share this information and continue to, create this space where we can learn from each other. I'm going to just read from Latasha in the chat. She said, "Hi, everyone. I'm Tasha, and I live in Ward 7. We've lived here for almost 12 years, and the basement flooded once since we've been here. We assumed our renter's insurance would cover the damages, but unfortunately it wasn't included. Lesson learned, and an immediate insurance update was made." So we've heard a few stories just like this throughout the course of this series, and we want to either prevent this from happening for other residents and educate you all on a little bit other measures that you can take to protect your home, protect your items and your belongings and yourselves when flooding does occur. So sorry that happened, Latasha, and I'm glad you're here to get some more information. Okay, and anybody else that would like to introduce yourself, can just say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm happy I'm here. Just tell me how you're feeling." But again, we're just happy you're here and that you made it today. And I'll keep today's session, just to let you know, it's not a super long session. We have cut our virtual workshops into 4 sessions, so they'd be a little bit shorter. So we want to make sure that you all can stay attentive. I know after a long day of work as well. And Rika also said she's interested in understanding the community needs and experiences within flooding in Ward 7, because she's working on a regional approach for blue-green infrastructure in the Watts Branch watershed. Great. Happy to have you and see that you've joined us again. Okay. So we're going to get into the flooding basics today. So the different types of flooding, how people are impacted, and we'll get into the flood insurance and the flood resilience measures at our later workshops. And please be sure to mute yourselves if you're not talking, just so everybody, we don't get that background noise. Okay, so some flooding basics. Results from rain, snow, coastal storms, storm surge, and overflows of dams and other water systems. This may develop slowly or quickly. Flash floods can come with no warning, and it may cause outages, disrupt transportation, damage buildings, and create landslides. So protect yourself for some key measures. You want to when flooding is occurring, you want to make sure that you have the best protection based on the type of flooding, which we're also going to get into. But these are a little bit about the flooding basics. This here is a water gauge. This here is a water gauge where you'll understand how much rain has occurred, and you'll be able to attest if you can see that this is happening in your home. And I'm going to show 2 videos about understanding flood risk in Watts Branch, as well as a resident experience with flooding in Ward 7 due to Watts Branch. And can you all hear this? Let me know.
Yes, it's low.
It's low. Let me see if I can turn the volume up. Okay. I'll take this out.
from universities and local, regional, and federal agencies. In 2017, the Silver Jackets kicked off the Watts Branch Flood Risk Management Study to assess current and future flood risk for far northeast Ward 7, identify opportunities to reduce flood risk, and to increase public awareness of the issue. They leverage the latest data and technologies to develop new flood modeling and mapping, which helps us better understand where and how deep flooding could occur in the Watts Branch. We're going to review the study's key findings and its short and long-term recommendations. But first, let's talk about flood risk in the Watts Branch. Why did the Silver Jackets study Watts Branch for flood risk? To explain why, we must consider the land's history, its topography, its current development, and its future. Until the mid-20th century, the Watts Branch watershed was primarily an agricultural area. Today, the watershed is highly urbanized. As the area developed in the 1950s, the Watts Branch, a tributary of the Anacostia River, was narrowed and channelized to make way for buildings and roads. With more urbanization, land that once allowed the soil to absorb rain is now covered with buildings and pavement. Rain falling on these areas becomes runoff. The volume of the runoff from big storm events is more than Watts Branch can handle. The surrounding topography and watershed characteristics make communities along the Watts Branch's banks particularly vulnerable to flooding, which can occur quickly and without a lot of warning. The history of flooding in Watts Branch is not well documented, but we do know that in August 1933, a significant flood occurred. Water rose to the level of fire hydrants, flooding roads and basements and stranding cars. If you live or do business in the communities around Watts Branch, you may have seen the large-scale stream restoration projects over the last 20 years. Despite important improvements to the health of the Watts Branch stream, the flood risk remains. On September 10th, 2020, an intense rainfall brought 3 to 4 inches of rain in just 2 hours, causing the Watts Branch stream to rise and overflow. Hayes Street, Galt Place, and Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue were all flooded, causing building and vehicle damage throughout the community. Over the next century, climate change is expected to increase the intensity and frequency of extreme precipitation events, putting additional stress on infrastructure and increasing flood risk. Watts Branch is identified as a priority area in the district's climate change adaptation plan because of its combination of low-lying, flood-prone areas, high-density structures, and critical infrastructure with vulnerable populations, including affordable and public housing developments. A flood in an area with vulnerable populations can have a devastating impact on residents. The Watts Branch Flood Risk Management Study included new flood modeling by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers using the latest technology. The modeling and associated flood maps were updated to display the present and future flood risk, including a look ahead to consider climate impacts in 2080. This study improves upon the 2010 Washington, D.C. flood insurance study with better accuracy and future scenario analysis. Data collected to create these revised flood models included field surveys of bridges, streams, and stormwater facilities, the latest digital ground elevations for the district, updated rainfall statistics, land use information, and blueprints of recent developments. DOEE conducted surveys in 2018 to gather detailed building elevation information for 70 flood-prone buildings. These surveys help to estimate where water could enter a property during a flood, and these properties were provided with National Flood Insurance Program elevation certificates, which are official FEMA documents that can be used for determining flood risk and insurance premiums. There is still substantial risk of flooding throughout far northeast Ward 7. New modeling shows over 200 buildings in the 100-year floodplain. DOEE will submit the new modeling to update flood insurance rate maps in the area, which may make certain property owners eligible for lower flood insurance premiums. While the new modeling shows a decrease in structures vulnerable to a 100-year flood, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers also studied what the floodplain could look like in the future. Climate change projections for future rainfall in the 2080s indicate a substantial increase in overall flood risk. with the new modeling showing over 400 buildings in the 100-year floodplain throughout the course of the study. Conversations with stakeholders made it clear that nuisance flooding is often observed in neighborhoods a good distance away from the Watts Branch stream, likely due to aging infrastructure that was not designed for these significant rainstorms. Although detailed surveys were not conducted on the stormwater pipe network, the model can be further refined in the future by conducting these surveys and integrating the updated data into the model. With new flood modeling and mapping completed for the study area, the team moved to the next phase of the study, which included developing a set of options to reduce risk and an outreach strategy for increasing flood risk awareness throughout far Northeast Ward 7. This will be further discussed in part 2 of this module.
So that was the first video, and then this next video will be a spotlight on a DC resident that has been impacted by
Tired
flooding.
of typing tons of notes during class? There's finally a better way.
And while this is playing, for those of you that are just entering the chat or entering the webinar, please be sure to complete that that form that I just sent in the chat.
I am a DC native. When we get these heavy pours, which you can't stop Mother Nature, you can't stop inclement weather. And so when we would get this inclement weather, heavy pours, I got water damage in my basement. Certain items that I had that was sentimental to me, that my grandmother and my mother had given me that was damaged. Until I decided to get work done. Yeah, because of that. And I no longer left stuff in the basement that I knew that probably would get damaged. I brought it upstairs. I had to do that water improvement because I wouldn't be able to live in my house.
And so that is a resident's individual experience with flooding. And when she talks about those water improvements, those are going to be in our upcoming session on flooding resilience and some of those measures that you can take to protect your homes. Okay. So to get in a little bit into the different types of flooding, the District of Columbia has a long history of flooding dating back to the 19th century. There are 3 types of flooding that the district faces, including riverine, tidal, and coastal storm surge, and interior. Major riverine floods occurred in 1936, 1937, and 1942, and we had 2 in 1996. Major tidal floods occurred in 1933 and 1972, and in Hurricane Agnes, in 2002 in 2003, in Hurricane Isabel. The most notable interior flooding events were in June 2006 in Federal Triangle, in 2012 in Bloomingdale and the LaDroit Park neighborhoods. And so those might be monumental floods that you might remember, but I know there are some more recent floods that have transpired in the district that we might remember seeing on the news. More recently, I know there was a woman that I saw on WUSA 9 and Southern Avenue. She experienced some flooding in her home, I think 6 months ago, and there was still she was still waiting for a lot of that work, a lot of that, a lot of what you're supposed to do after the flood to be taken care of. So a lot of times we talk about that one thing, that instance of flooding, but it leaves a lot of damage. You can deal with mold, mildew, different belongings being misplaced. So there's a lot of things that come with it. And I remember seeing a story about her. Some of you might remember district dogs as well. If you have any notable flooding events that you remember, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And these are some other types of flooding that we didn't mention, including rivers. And it says, example, Watts Branch and Oxen Run, and I'll give those examples of those 2 waterways. Water mains, storm surge, sea level rise, storm drains, and basements. So these are all different types of flooding. These workshops are geared towards our Ward 7 and 8 residents because we have the most residents that live in the 100 or 500-year floodplain. I will explain that in just shortly what a floodplain is. But what it basically means is it's you're more prone to experiencing flooding based on your proximity to these water waves. So Watts Branch is in Ward 7 in Oxen Run. Oxen Run Stream is located throughout Oxen Run Park. It starts in Prince George's County and leads all the way into the Potomac River. In that first video, they discussed a little bit about channeling, and they showed Watts Branch. Oxen Run has also been channeled, which means there is a concrete channel that is located within the stream to help guide that water in a certain direction. So back in the 70s, they put that there to help try to mitigate flooding. As of right now, through programming as well as through work with the Department of Energy and Environment, they will be working to naturalize that stream. So without the concrete channel, how a lot of that stream and river looked in this video, with rocks and different sorts of that to guide the water, to kind of eliminate some of the trash that is getting there, but also do it in a way that will still protect residents from flooding. Do we have any questions on the different types of flooding? Feel free to drop them in the chat or use the Q&A tool. And I see some of you are asking for the sign-in link. I'm gonna drop that in there again. And I'll do it again at the end to make sure that everybody received it as well. Okay. Any questions about types of flooding? Okay, I'll move on. This is another example of that flood that Deborah was speaking about in that video. This is a photo of that flood. And if I see the mouse here, a lot of people in DC, I know we're notable for our porches. In this case, her home, I believe has a basement, which means that this basement is most likely flooded. There's no elevation on this house. So you can see this impact of flooding. This is all generally a grassy area where this water is covering. So this is just some of the detriment of what flooding can cause in people's areas. Okay. And this is an example of storm drains and interior flooding. So we can see the street, and a lot of times when we have a lot of heavy rainfall, our storm drains can kind of overflow or get filled up, or even sometimes we might see a lot of litter in our storm drains, and that water is not able to go down and do what it is meant to do. This is another example of that. And yes, the storm drain needs cleaning. So if you see any of these little stickers or tags, it means that this stream, is the house ruined when that happened, is one of the questions. The house is not ruined, but it does take a lot for people to dry the house and to remedy what happened during the flood. So they'll have to dry the house, remove all of the water, remove any of the damaged pieces, and then also make some repairs to, the walls or the outlets, whatever that was damaged. So a lot of cost and damage. It doesn't necessarily mean the home is ruined, but significant costs associated with repairing the home. Back to this slide, this storm drain needs to be cleaned. So as I was saying, any of these stickers that you see on storm drains means that it directly leads to the Anacostia and or Potomac River, which lead to the Chesapeake Bay. So we want to keep our bay clean, we want to keep our rivers clean and our streets clean. So a little form of community resilience against flooding is, you know, to talk to people if you see them littering, or, you know, as a community group, or maybe with some youth or students, go out on a Saturday morning and decide to pick up some trash to help remedy what's going on. There used to be some funding to help that, and but since I know it's been stripped away, I know with some of the programs that we did have with Department of Energy and Environment, and some of their funding has been stripped for that. So as a community, I encourage you all to still get out there and, you know, help keep the drains clean so we don't have to deal with this, okay? Okay, and flooding in basements. So this is a pipe bursting. This is another type of flooding that can occur from, you know, your pipe, your pipe bust, or, you know, it's too much water in that gauge that we were talking about before. This is another type of flooding that can occur in your home, as well as water main breaks. Okay, this is another example of a water main break. They're more prone to breaking during cold weather. According to DC Water, during the busiest weeks, DC Water may have up to 20 different water main breaks at one time. So report a water emergency, such as a water main break or a sewer backup, be sure to contact DC Water or report an emergency with their online system. Okay, and this is an example of storm surge flooding. This picture is actually from Annapolis, and it's a statue. I should have an actual picture of what it usually looks like, but this statue shows, I can't even remember how much rain it was, but this picture is from Annapolis at the Kunta Kinte Alex Haley Memorial. And it's actually the only memorial that commemorates the actual name and place of arrival of an enslaved African. The memorial consists of 3 distinct areas: the sculpture group, the compass rose, and the story wall. So he is holding a book in this and showing the different bronze plates. But this is almost like a life-size, this is pretty much a life-size memorial, which you can kind of see how much flooding is taking place here. Storm surges are caused by hurricanes. Hurricanes are huge storm systems that form over ocean water and move toward land. Hurricanes involve heavy rain, damaging wind speeds, flash flooding, and storm surge. Hurricane season extends from June 1st to November 30th, and it is in its peak in September. As the hurricane approaches the coast, a huge storm of water called a storm surge will crash into the coastline. Ward 7 is protected from mostly, Ward 7 and 8 are mostly protected from storm surge flooding, with the only largest category 4 and 5 storms threatening flooding in low-lying areas. Okay. Sea level rise. In the district, water levels for the Potomac and Anacostia rivers, both tidal rivers, have increased 11 inches in the past 90 years. As a result, flooding along our riverfront has increased more than 300% according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA. Sea level rise will only amplify with this trend. Since most people in Ward 7 live away from the river sea level rise area, this is less of a concern. This photo is the high tide of flooding off of Ohio Drive on Haynes Point. Okay. Okay. And I'll pause here for any questions as it relates to the different types of flooding. Does anybody have any questions as I dive a little bit deeper? Important for you to know in DC, it's really riverine and tidal and coastal storm surge and interior flooding that would be of concern. Okay. Okay. So what is a floodplain? You heard me use this the term floodplain. So the floodplain is noted as a special flood hazard area, and it's based on few different factors, including base flood elevation, the normal water level, and then where you are located in proximity to these bodies of water. A floodplain is generally a flat area of land next to a river or a stream. It stretches from the banks of the river to the outer edges of the valley. A floodplain consists of two parts. The first is the main channel of the river itself, called the floodway. But beyond the floodway is the flood fringe, and it extends from the outer banks of the floodway to the bluff lines of a river valley. And one of the most visible floodplains in Ward 7 is the entrance of Kenilworth Park on the north side of West Watts Branch. The Eastland Garlands neighborhood is built on the bluff of the overlook of that plain. So as you would think, yes, that area experiences a lot of flooding. Okay. So to take a little break and think of the history of flooding in Washington, D.C., what are some examples of flooding that you know about, and what types of flooding do you think they were? Any examples of flooding that you know about, and what types do you think they were? Or you can even speak to your own type of flooding. Like Latasha, do you know what type of flooding that occurred in your home? Okay. No? Okay. Feel free to drop any in the chat. You can also do a quick little online search and look at, different types of flooding, just to understand a little bit more about the history of flooding in Washington, D.C. Okay. So where does it flood? We're going to find out with FEMA flood maps. And a flood map shows where the flood risks are associated. A flood map or a flood insurance rate map is an official map created by FEMA that defines special flood hazard areas or flood zones. So this map is used as a resource to you to understand where your home, your church, or any other community space that you use, how they might be impacted by flooding, but it will also be used by your insurance company that will be determining your flood insurance rate to understand what your risk is and where your risk is. Okay, and a few things that are on a flood map is where a flood zone is and what type of zone it is, floodplain boundaries, roads and landmarks, and that base flood elevation. So this is a Watts Branch flood map. I don't think I have the key on here, but as you can see, as mentioned in that video, Nannie Helen Burroughs was impacted by that flooding that's here through this way. And she also mentioned Hayes Street in that video. Okay, and this is the Anacostia River, where you can see most of that flooding will be coming from that source. And you don't necessarily have to live in a floodplain to experience flooding in your home. A lot of people are experiencing different impacts on their homes due to more severe climate events. So of course, since they're more severe, that means that are impacting more people. And flood maps and these maps are not always reflective of the actual impact, but these are what we would note are the most impacted areas. Okay. So in this blue here, you will see a 100-year flood zone, which is known as Zone AE. And then in the yellow is a 500-year flood zone or floodplain, which is known as Zone X. So back to this image, a floodplain is what percent of annual chance of a floodplain. So this is basically saying that 1 in 100 years that a flooding accident can occur, or 1 in 500 years is the chances. when you think about probability and how often a flooding might occur in these areas. Obviously, it is way more than that. It's not saying that, okay, I haven't had a flood. I had a flood. Now I won't have to worry about it in another 100 years. That's just the likelihood. Okay. And I'm going to share this resource in the chat on how to read a flood map for you all to take a look at on your own time as well. Okay. And again, we have the zone AE in the 100-year floodplain and zone X in the 500-year floodplain. So some examples of 1 in a 100 likelihood, you would consider flipping a coin, and the probability of getting 1 and 2 is 50%. So now you're going to flip the coin 3 times in a row, and the probability of getting heads on all 3 flips is approximately 1 in 100. So that is what we're looking at when we're talking about probability as it relates to the floodplain. This is not that important of information. It's just a little bit of background. What you should know is that flooding does occur, flooding does happen, and you're more likely for it to be impacted by flooding if you live in one of these zones. That does not mean that you are not going to be impacted by flooding. Again, it just means that you are more likely to be impacted if you live in the 100 or 500-year floodplains. Any questions about floodplains? Okay. So where can I get a flood map? You guys are free to take these the QR codes of this. I will also send it in the chat. So this is the DC flood risk map, and then this is also the DC flood risk portal. So both of these will be kind of part of the activity, which you'll be able to engage, look for your own house on the flood risk portal, and I will also be able to share my screen. I'm going to be sharing my screen and showing a few examples. Okay. So in this example, we're going to demonstrate how to find it, how to navigate it, how to get a flood map, and you can also kind of pull some information here. So, okay, I'm going to just go to the flooding map. Okay, and so when you enter it, you enter the DC flood risk portal and you will accept. Let me make my screen big for myself. Okay, please let me know if you cannot see my screen or if anything is too small. So. So search, we can search a certain location. I will search the Fauntroy Center where we had our first workshop. Let me just put Nanny Helen Burroughs. That will be easier. Okay, so as we can see, Nanny Helen Burroughs is located within the floodplain. And based on our key, it is located in the 100-year floodplain. Okay, so we can see Nanny Helen Burroughs is located in a 100-year floodplain, which expands its likelihood of experiencing a flood. And then I will go to our other resource tool. I think this is the same one. So you can look at different areas in the flood risk. And you can also look at different layers. So you can look at socioeconomic, infrastructure, political. These are the different things you can test for, but we just tend to focus on the flood hazard. Okay. Are there any locations that you all would like for me to try in particular for where flooding might occur, or even to test and see where your home is located or the vicinity of your home if you don't feel comfortable sharing? If it's located in the floodplain, just let me know. But it does do by individual addresses. Let's see if I can show you guys. So, for example, this is showing the floodplain layer, kind of what I just explained here. Okay, these are all in AE. I'm going to do something on in. Okay, so I'm going to look at Oakwood Street, Southeast. This is not located in the floodplain, but if we look at it to the perspective of where the water is, this could be impacted by flooding due to heavy rainfall, if you will, but it wouldn't be as likely. This is where the well at Oxen Run is located along Valley Avenue. And we were talking about Oxen Run. This is where that park is located and where that stream is. And as you can see here, this is where a lot of these homes and surrounding the stream are located in the 100 and 500 year floodplains. Okay, so I encourage you all to use this map and use this tool to play around with. You can look at different areas in DC. You can look what your impact is, and also, you know, impact of maybe your neighbor, your friend, or anybody else. Okay. Do we have any questions about floodplains at all? Or flood zones? Oh, I see some questions. Okay, the chat, let's say. Okay. This storm needs cleanliness and trash can be recycled. Absolutely. What shall we do to reduce flooding and the damage of flooding? So as for reducing flooding, we can't, like Connie Womack said, you can't really do anything about the climate and Mother Nature, but we can make ourselves more resilient towards flooding. So I'll get a little bit more into the flood resilience measures, Mark. In our next session, not our next session, actually our third session will be focusing on flood resilience measures. The second session, which I'll give a preview of, will be focusing on flood insurance. And Patricia, I will also look at, is there a lot of flooding in the River Terrace area? So we can go back to this map and look at River Terrace, okay? So River Terrace is located near the river, near the Anacostia River, which means this is what its impact on flooding might look like. I would say that yes, River Terrace would experience flooding, but it would look a little bit differently. It might not be as severe as these people that live in the floodplain, but again, we have those more severe chances of cases of storm events and climate events happening. So it is likely that these residents in this area would be impacted by flooding, especially depending on the elevation level of their homes and where that baseline flooding is starting. Okay. Do we have any more questions? I think I answered everybody's question. Feel free to come off of mute if I did not answer your question. I'm trying to make sure I'm allowing everybody to talk that joined us. Yes, please let me know if you have any additional questions. Okay. Okay, and then again, these are the where you can get a flood map and where the DC risk portal is. And I'll give you a preview to the next session. So our next session will be on when and how to get flood insurance. The NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, provides flood insurance to property owners, renters, and businesses. And then having this coverage helps them recover faster when flood waters recede. So next session, we will get into the different types of flooding, the different types of flood insurance, for renters, for renters and homeowners, and the different types of buildings you may live in, including condos, apartments, houses, townhomes, all of them. So Please join us for our next session, which will get into that information. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and give you all the capacity to come onto screen and share your video, share your audio, to give any feedback that you may have, any questions that you may have, and kind of share a little bit more on the upcoming workshops, perhaps, to let us know what you might be looking forward to learning more about. Okay. I said I
Hey,
wasn't gonna
Jumani.
keep it too long. Yes, Sharice.
Hi, Jumani. This is Sharice.
Mhm.
I am actually looking to change my flood insurance, and I encourage everyone that's on the call that the NFIP is a great information source. And I learned something in the last session not last session, but the session before the last, where they went into the flood insurance, and I'm due to renew. So I don't think I'm going to renew. I think I want to change my flood insurance. Because of the impacts of and the information that I'm getting from NFIP that I did not get from my current flood insurance provider. So to me, I think that's indication that I do need to switch over, and I'm looking to get more information in the next session.
Great. Yes, and we will be joined by flooding experts. So we'll be joined by FEMA, Department of Energy and Environment, that provides some of these resilience strategies, as well as connects you to folks for for flood insurance. And we'll also have the DC Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking. All of them will be present to answer any questions that you have about flood insurance, and when to get it. Little disclaimer is never, you can get it now. You should get flood insurance as soon as possible, whether you feel like you're at risk or not at risk. And there's different types of flood insurance for renters and homeowners to protect yourselves and your belongings. So just please let me know if you have any questions about our upcoming session, but we look forward to having you. We thank you so much again for joining us. I did put the form in the chat again. I'll add it one more time to make sure that everybody is able to sign in. Again, this will be the way that we stay in touch with you throughout the course of these monthly virtual sessions, and then be able to connect and contact you to receive your stipend at the end. I encourage all of you to take a deep dive into some of these links that I shared in the chat. I'll also send a follow-up email with some of this information. And I also encourage you to share this information, share the flyer with a friend, a family member, and continue to spread the word. A lot of people don't know what they don't know until they have to experience something like this. So we want to continue to educate and share this information with all that are impacted. Again, thank you for your time this evening, and I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. I will see you on July 11th for our flood insurance with experts workshop. Right. Have a good night.